The North Korean military advanced into South Korea on June 25, 1950, and sent alarm bells ringing in the capitals of the new North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, as the Western powers swung into action to respond to Soviet-backed Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK, commonly known today as North Korea. They found themselves in a very new situation, responding to communist moves in faraway East Asia and acting in favor of the Republic of Korea, commonly known as South Korea. Western leaders started moves to fundamentally transform their alliance. It went from a political arrangement into an integrated military structure. When North Korean forces crossed the 38th parallel into South Korea in June 1950, the UN Security Council, although temporarily unhindered by a Soviet boycott, authorized a military response under UN Charter, Chapter 7. This became the first UN-sanctioned collective defense operation, with 16 NATO members, including the US, UK, and France, contributing troops under the UN command led by General Douglas MacArthur. Western leaders immediately interpreted the outbreak of war on the Korean peninsula through a European lens. They reasoned that if Stalin could support communist aggression in Asia, similar provocations might soon follow in divided Germany or vulnerable Yugoslavia. This perception triggered what U.S. Secretary of State Dean Acheson later called the Great Transformation of NATO, as member states moved with unprecedented speed to convert paper commitments into actual war-fighting capabilities. Within weeks, unauthorized troops that were predominantly American rushed to defend the Pusan perimeter, which was their last foothold in the Korean peninsula. General Douglas MacArthur's September 1950 Incheon landing reversed the war's course, enabling UN forces to push northward, nearly reaching the Chinese border at the Yalu River. This provoked China's massive November 1950 intervention, which drove UN troops back south in a brutal winter retreat. 3 years of grinding stalemate followed, with devastating aerial bombing of the north, and failed peace talks at Kaesong and Panmunjom. The July 1953 armistice froze the conflict near the original border, leaving Korea divided along a fortified demilitarized zone, DMZ. It was a ceasefire without peace that endures to this day. The war cost nearly 3 million lives, including 36,000 Americans and an estimated 1 million Korean civilians, and cemented the peninsula as a flashpoint of Cold War tensions. The war highlighted the unresolved tensions between multilateralism and U.S. hegemony. While it was all technically a UN operation, 90% of combat forces and logistics were American, and key strategic decisions were made in Washington and not at UN headquarters. As for NATO itself, the alliance played no formal role in Korea, but the conflict became a proving ground for alliance principles. European NATO members like Britain and France joined the UN effort partly to demonstrate Atlantic solidarity and ensure continued U.S. commitment to Europe's defense. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union's return to the Security Council in August 1950 paralyzed further UN actions, thereby forcing NATO states to rely on the UN General Assembly's Uniting for Peace resolution. It was a procedural short circuit that highlighted UN's declining role as Cold War tensions increased. Within weeks of the Korean invasion, NATO had established the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, SHAPE, in December 1950, with General Dwight Eisenhower assuming command as the first Supreme Allied Commander. This marked a major development for the first time in peacetime. American military leadership was permanently embedded in European defense. Eisenhower's arrival in Paris in January 1951 symbolized the new reality. 12 divisions of U.S. troops would now remain stationed in Europe indefinitely, backed by nuclear-capable Strategic Air Command bombers based in Britain. The creation of NATO's integrated command structure forced European militaries to abandon cherished national autonomy, with French and British officers now taking orders from an American Supreme Commander in operational matters. The Korean conflict accelerated NATO's military buildup at breakneck speed. Defense expenditures among member states skyrocketed from $18 billion in 1950 to $61 billion by 1953, an increase that would have been politically impossible before Seoul's fall to northern forces. The Lisbon Conference of February 1952 set ambitious new force goals: 50 active divisions, 4,000 aircraft, and 700 major combat ships to be ready by 1954. Not all Western leaders were fully on board with the increasing overlap between U.S. grand strategy and European defense. The era of the Korean War revived serious discussions about West German rearmament. France, in particular, was nervous about the American-backed possibility of a rearmed West Germany. During this period, France proposed a European Defense Community, EDC, a supranational army that would have absorbed German units. It was a creative solution from the French, but ultimately a doomed idea. The EDC Treaty, signed in May 1952 by 6 nations, France, West Germany, Italy, Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, was the most radical attempt to separate European security from NATO, while preventing independent German rearmament. Its institutional design was similar to that of the emerging European coal and steel community, featuring a council of ministers, parliamentary assembly, and unified budget. It was to be a proto-EU military structure decades ahead of its time. French military establishment resented the idea of dissolving French forces into a multinational force. Many officers feared it would take away their control over colonial operations in Indochina and Algeria, where France was already fighting brutal wars. Britain's refusal to participate in the EDC, preferring NATO, made the project seem like a Franco-German trap, leaving France isolated and bearing the risks of integration. Many French lawmakers questioned why France should give up its army if the British retained full sovereignty over theirs. The proposal collapsed spectacularly in August 1954 when the French National Assembly refused ratification due to opposition from Gaullists and French communists. This failure directly triggered West Germany's 1955 NATO accession, making the EDC a what-if in Cold War history. Rather than European strategic autonomy, NATO became the only game in town. Moscow's actions during the Korean War further increased NATO cohesion. Soviet-supplied MiG-15 jets flown by Chinese and North Korean pilots, usually with Soviet advisors in the cockpit, exposed the Kremlin's proxy war strategy, convincing NATO planners that Europe could face similar wars. When the USSR detonated its thermonuclear device in August 1953, just months after Stalin's death, it erased NATO's atomic monopoly and validated the alliance's rapid nuclearization. Soviet military action against the 1953 East German uprising became the final catalyst. By combining fierce ideological hostility with occasional gestures of peaceful coexistence towards the West, Soviet policy during this critical period achieved the opposite of its intentions. Moscow's posture eventually locked in permanent. U.S. military deployments across Western Europe, the Korean War, transformed NATO's nuclear posture. The United States began forward deploying tactical nuclear weapons to Europe in 1951, while NATO strategy documents increasingly emphasized atomic bombs as the equalizer against Soviet conventional superiority. This doctrinal shift reached its peak with Men C-14/1, NATO's first official strategic concept, adopted in December 1952, which authorized first use of nuclear weapons if conventional defenses collapsed. The document essentially made NATO security guarantee credible by connecting European defense to America's nuclear arsenal, a policy that would define Cold War deterrence for decades to come.